What if I told you a little girl disappeared in less than 2 minutes? Not in a dark alley, not at a crowded mall, but right in front of her house while her dad was just steps away. 40 years ago, this happened in a quiet Colorado town, a place where nothing bad ever happened, until one summer afternoon when everything changed. This is not just about a missing child. This is about something way darker, something that turned a peaceful neighborhood into a living nightmare. What happened next still haunts people today. Some stories fade with time. This one never did. Let me tell you about Lori Poland and the day that changed Colorado forever. August 22nd, 1983. Sheridan, Colorado was the kind of place where life moved slow and easy. Summer afternoons felt like they would last forever. Green lawns, quiet streets, kids playing outside without a single worry. You could hear their laughter through open windows of brick homes. The loudest sound on a weekday afternoon was leaves rustling or sprinklers hitting the grass. This was a town where parents felt safe, where neighbors knew each other, where bad things just didn't happen here. That Monday, the Poland house on West Oxford Avenue felt calm and normal. Lori was 3 years old with honey blonde curls. She sat on the front step with her 5-year-old brother. Both kids had sticky fingers from the popsicles their dad brought home. It was the last week before kindergarten started, the final days of summer freedom. Their mom folded laundry inside. Their dad watched from the porch, smiling at his kids playing. Everything felt perfect in that moment. Just before 2 in the afternoon, the sun hung high. Nothing seemed wrong. The dad told the kids to stay put while he went inside. He wanted to grab another popsicle for himself. He left the door slightly open behind him. The kind of thing you do when your kids are right there in front of you. He could still see them. They were just a few steps away. He was gone for less than 2 minutes. When he stepped back outside, the world felt wrong. Too still, unnaturally quiet. His son stood near the curb staring down the street. The small plastic tricycle Lori had been riding lay tipped on its side. One wheel turned slowly in the breeze, but Lori herself was gone. At first, he thought she went inside to find her mom. He called her name once, then twice. His voice cut through the quiet. No answer. He checked the side of the house, then the yard, then behind the hedges. Panic rose in his throat before his mind had words for it. Lori. He ran down the driveway, scanning the empty street. Nothing moved except a lone car far down the block, turning out of sight. He sprinted to the corner, calling again. The name echoed uselessly off houses. By then his wife came out. She sensed something wrong in his voice. Her face changed instantly when she saw the tricycle on the ground in the space where her daughter should have been. She called out too. Her voice broke mid-sentence. Neighbors opened doors and came running. They began searching front yards and alleys. One woman thought she heard a child laugh near the intersection minutes earlier, but she wasn't sure. The next hour was chaos wrapped in silence. The parents moved like people underwater, calling, searching, praying, refusing to believe what their eyes told them. Someone phoned the police. Others gathered in small groups, spreading out in every direction. They checked the backyard, the nearby park, the open field beyond the houses. It was like the little girl had dissolved into air. When officers arrived, the father stood on the curb with shaking hands. He tried to explain what couldn't be explained. "I was right here," he said over and over. "She was right here." The officer nodded, already scanning the area, already radioing for backup. Within half an hour, patrol cars lined the block. Officers knocked on every door. They asked every neighbor the same question. "Did you see a little girl? Did you see anyone stop here?" Most hadn't. Some mentioned hearing a car door or seeing a vehicle slowing down, but no one could describe a face, a license plate, or even the color of the car with certainty. As the sun lowered, the search widened. Dozens of volunteers joined police. They walked shoulder to shoulder through the neighborhood. They combed through bushes, behind sheds, under porches. A helicopter circled overhead. Its searchlight swept over rooftops as the evening news began broadcasting the story. The photo they used was Lori's preschool picture. Round cheeks, a pink dress, a shy half-smile that made viewers ache. By nightfall, confusion had turned into fear. The parents sat on their porch steps, surrounded by officers and neighbors. The mother clutched one of Lori's stuffed animals like it was her heartbeat. The street, once filled with sounds of children playing, was silent now. Only the distant crackle of police radios. When darkness fell, officers brought search dogs. The animals sniffed along the sidewalk. They circled the curb. then wandered a few yards down the street before losing the scent entirely. The handler looked up, shaking his head. The trail stopped cold, as if the child had simply vanished. By midnight, word spread across Sheridan. A little girl disappeared in broad daylight. Strangers arrived to help, carrying flashlights and thermoses of coffee. They searched until dawn, calling her name into empty air. Her parents didn't sleep. They sat by the front window, staring at the yard, illuminated by streetlight, waiting for the impossible, for the sound of small footsteps, for the shadow of a child walking home. But the yard stayed empty. The tricycle stayed where it had fallen. As the clock passed into early morning hours, the reality none could speak aloud began settling in. A 3-year-old girl had vanished. Not from a forest trail or crowded mall, but from her own front yard under open sky. No struggle, no witnesses, no sound. Just a silence so deep it seemed to have swallowed her whole. How could a child disappear between one heartbeat and the next, in a place where nothing bad was supposed to happen? By midnight, the neighborhood was no longer quiet. The sound of radios, the bark of dogs, the shuffle of boots on asphalt. It all filled the air like static. Floodlights bathed the Poland home in pale blue. Officers moved with controlled urgency, sweeping through yards and alleys. The search stretched into early morning. Volunteers with flashlights scoured streets in small groups. Every few minutes, someone called out her name. Every time, the only reply was silence. A tricycle still lay on its side by the curb, untouched, its plastic wheels glistening under streetlight like an accusation. By dawn, the command post was set. Coffee cups, paper maps, names scribbled across clipboards. Police dogs picked up a faint trace near the sidewalk and lost it before the next house. No footprints, no fibers, no sound of struggle. The trail didn't fade away. It stopped as if the world had swallowed a child whole. Through the day, officers went door to door. Did you see anyone? Did you hear a car? Each answer came the same. No, nothing. By the afternoon of August 23rd, Sheridan no longer felt like a small town. It felt like a crime scene. News vans lined the block. Reporters whispered into microphones. Their voices carried live into homes across Colorado. A 3-year-old girl gone without a trace. Her photo. The pink dress. The uneven bangs. On every TV screen, neighbors who'd known the family for years stood helpless behind police tape. The mother sat on porch steps, clutching one of Lori's toys. The father walked the same stretch of sidewalk again and again, staring down at the spot where she'd last stood. That night, rain began to fall. Slow at first, then steady. Searchers trudged through wet grass, their flashlights cutting across empty fields. The rain washed away any remaining trace that might have been left behind. By the second night, exhaustion had replaced adrenaline. The officers' voices were low, clipped, professional. The volunteers no longer spoke. Everyone understood what time meant in cases like this. Still, the search continued. They pushed deeper into the outskirts. Drainage tunnels, abandoned sheds, creek beds half hidden under weeds. Nothing. When the sun rose again, posters were already up on every wall and telephone pole. Missing, Lori Poland, age 3. Yet for all the noise, the sirens, the cameras, there was no sound of her. Not a cry, not a trace, not even a whisper to follow. In a town that had always believed it was safe, something unthinkable had happened, and no one could explain how. The search for Lori Poland stretched into its 3rd day. The town of Sheridan began to lose its rhythm. What started as panic was now something heavier. A quiet grinding dread. The police grid expanded to neighboring counties. Helicopters traced the same empty fields over and over, their lights cutting through dawn fog like tired eyes refusing to close. Every morning began the same. New volunteers, fresh maps, the same unanswered questions. Every night ended the same way, officers trudging back to their cars, soaked in sweat and silence. No footprints, no clothing, no sign of a struggle. It felt like the earth itself refused to give her back. At the Poland home, reporters stood behind yellow tape, their cameras pointed at the house, waiting for any sign of emotion. Inside, the house smelled like stale coffee mixed with rain. Lori's mother sat at the kitchen table staring at the phone, willing it to ring. Her father refused to come inside. He stood in the yard at the same spot until streetlights came on. When the sheriff told him to rest, he only said, "Not while she's still out there." Television anchors spoke in careful tones. Authorities continue to search, they said, though chances of survival diminish with time. Those words hung heavy in every living room. Parents in Sheridan started keeping their children inside. Front doors stayed locked. Blinds stayed drawn. The sound of laughter had vanished from the neighborhood. By the fourth night, the command post had gone quiet. Maps covered with circles and red pins told the same story. All routes closed, all leads cold. The rain had washed away what little scent the dogs found. Even officers stopped promising tomorrow would bring answers. The following morning was August 26th. A candlelight vigil formed outside the Poland house. Dozens of neighbors gathered under gray skies. Candles trembled in the wind. Someone prayed aloud. Someone else whispered her name. The mother appeared briefly at the door, her face pale, her hands shaking around the candle she carried. "We just want her home," she said. Her voice cracked. No one replied. The only sound was rain hissing on pavement. When the crowd left, the street fell silent again. Patrol cars idled a while longer, then drove away one by one. The flashing lights faded into mist. By the end of that week, Sheridan was empty of noise, a town waiting for a sound that never came. By the fifth day, the search had thinned to a handful of officers and volunteers who refused to give up. The official command post was being packed away. The sheriff had already told reporters that the active ground operation would scale down, though no one wanted to say aloud what that meant. After 5 days, survival was a word even the most hopeful were beginning to avoid. The posters still clung to every light pole, the photo of the smiling girl now smudged by rain and dust. People crossed the street when they saw the Poland house. Not out of cruelty, but out of quiet superstition that tragedy might be contagious. Inside, the family existed in slow motion, eating without tasting, speaking without hearing. The phone never stopped ringing, yet it never brought news that mattered. Then late in the afternoon of August 27, 1983, a different kind of call came in, not to Sheridan, but to a ranger station 40 miles west near the edge of the mountains outside Denver. A couple had been hiking along an old service road. They stopped by a weathered wooden outhouse, one of those forgotten roadside structures used by hunters decades ago. The man was a bird watcher. He stepped toward it when he heard something faint, a sound so soft it could have been the wind or the creak of wood. But then it came again. Thinner this time, unmistakably human. He froze, listening. The voice was small, strained, coming from below. At first he thought it might be an animal trapped under the floorboards. He knelt, called out a tentative hello, and leaned closer to the opening. The voice came again, clearer now, 2 words that shouldn't have been possible. "Help me." The man stumbled backward, yelling for his wife. They peered down into the black pit, the stench of waste rising up with the heat. It was almost 15 feet deep. When they shone their flashlight inside, the beam caught something pale moving against the dark. A small hand, a face. The woman gasped. The man turned and sprinted for their car, radioing the nearest ranger station through a CB line. Within an hour, the area was swarming with responders. Forest rangers, local deputies, firefighters. No one wanted to believe what they'd heard, but the voice didn't stop. It called again, faint but insistent, breaking through the hum of radios and shouts. "I'm here." The firefighters rigged a rope harness, lowered a man into the hole. Within minutes, his voice echoed upward, trembling. "It's a child. She's alive." When he emerged, he was holding a small body wrapped in a dirty towel. She was barely conscious, her skin gray with exhaustion, her hair matted with grime. The rescuers could smell infection, a sour chemical odor from the pit. Her clothes were shredded, her feet raw and blistered. One of the paramedics recognized her from the missing posters before anyone said her name. "It's Lori," he whispered. And suddenly no one could move. She was rushed to the nearest hospital in Denver, sirens clearing the highway. The doctors who met her at the emergency room doors thought at first she wouldn't survive the night. Her body temperature was dangerously low. Her legs were swollen and raw from chemical burns. She hadn't eaten or drunk water in nearly 4 days, and yet somehow she clung to life. When nurses tried to speak to her, she barely responded. Her eyes flicked to every movement in the room, but she didn't cry. When asked what had happened, she whispered only fragments, words about a man, a car, the dark. But most of what she said didn't make sense, the way a child's dream doesn't make sense to an adult. Her parents were notified an hour after her rescue. The father's knees gave out when he heard the words, "She's alive." He didn't believe them until he saw her himself, hooked up to machines. Her small hands wrapped in gauze. Her mother sat beside the hospital bed for 12 hours straight, refusing to leave even when doctors urged her to rest. News of the rescue spread faster than the original disappearance. By nightfall, reporters had gathered outside the hospital. Cameramen stood in the rain, broadcasting live as the nation watched a story that no one expected to end this way. A missing child found alive after 4 days underground. Inside the hospital, though, the atmosphere was quieter. Nurses whispered. Doctors moved softly. The miracle of her survival carried its own kind of gravity, the kind that demanded reverence. When she finally woke fully that night, she was disoriented. Her voice was rough from dehydration. When asked if she knew where she was, she shook her head. A nurse tried to reassure her, telling her she was safe, that she'd been rescued. Lori blinked slowly, as if trying to remember. Then in a whisper, she said the same words the hikers had heard echoing from the pit. "I live here now." No one in the room spoke after that. It was as if the sentence itself carried the weight of all she'd endured. The way a child's mind tries to make sense of something it was never meant to know. The next morning, investigators arrived at the site of her rescue. They photographed everything: the outhouse, the rope marks, the small impressions near the edge where someone had stood. There were tire tracks on the dirt road nearby, faint, half erased by rain, and something else that made one of the deputies stop short. A torn piece of fabric caught in a nail on the wooden frame, the color matching the dress Lori had last been seen wearing. The pit itself told the rest of the story. She had been thrown in, not fallen. There was no way a child that young could have climbed down without help. The steep walls were slick with mud and waste. She had survived by standing on a small pile of debris, just high enough to keep her head above the filth, calling for help into the dark. When the sheriff arrived, he stood at the edge for a long time without speaking. Finally, he said what everyone was thinking. Whoever did this didn't mean for her to be found. Back at the hospital, Lori was beginning to stabilize. Her fever had broken, her breathing steadied. When a nurse asked if she remembered the man who took her, she shook her head. "He said he'd bring me candy," she whispered, then closed her eyes. Outside, the crowd of reporters grew until the street was blocked with vans. The story ran on every major network that night. The girl who came back from the dark. People called it a miracle. But the detectives didn't see a miracle. They saw a message. Somewhere out there was a man who had taken a child, done the unthinkable, left her to die, and now knew that she had lived to tell it. This case had changed overnight. What had begun as a missing person search was now something far more dangerous. The hospital room where Lori Poland slept was quiet, except for the soft pulse of the heart monitor. Nurses moved gently around her bed, adjusting IV lines and whispering updates to the detectives standing near the door. 4 days in a pit, they kept reminding each other. 4 days in darkness, alone, without food or water. No one could understand how she was still alive. This shouldn't be possible. When Lori finally opened her eyes fully, she was frightened by the brightness of the room. Her voice was barely more than a whisper. Her words came out in fragments, as though they had been shattered by what she'd endured. She remembered a man, a car, the sound of gravel under tires. He had offered her candy. He said he'd take her to her father. And then darkness. The smell of something sharp and foul. Detectives took notes quietly, careful not to interrupt. Lori was only 3 years old, but some of the details were specific. The car seat was orange. The inside smelled like metal. The man had a scratch on his cheek. The windows, she said, were down. It wasn't much, but it was something, a starting point. That same evening, investigators returned to the area around the Poland home. Several neighbors had previously reported seeing a small orange car on the day Lori vanished. The color wasn't common, a faded, rusted orange like a late 1970s Datsun sedan. One woman even recalled part of the license plate. CR something. Detectives began to pull DMV records for every orange Datsun registered within 50 miles of Sheridan. There were 27 in total. The task force split the list into zones, sending plainclothes officers to quietly check each owner. They weren't looking for confessions, just inconsistencies. 3 nights later, one of the names drew attention. Robert Paul Thierret, 21 years old, living alone in a rented duplex just 8 miles from the Poland home. His neighbors described him as odd but polite, a quiet man who often tinkered with his car late at night. He drove an old orange Datsun sedan, parked along the street behind his building. Detectives arrived before dawn. The car was there. On the back seat, they noticed something small but immediate. A few strands of blonde hair caught in the fabric. A warrant was issued by noon. Inside the car, the crime lab technicians collected samples that would later speak louder than any testimony. Traces of blood under the passenger seat, a torn fiber matching the hem of Lori's pink dress, and a small wrapper from the same brand of candy Lori's father had bought that morning. When the evidence was presented to Thierret that afternoon, he barely reacted. His expression remained calm, detached, his voice flat. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. "I saw that little girl walking alone. I tried to help her." He told them he'd driven her around too, to look for her parents, but denied taking her anywhere else. When they pressed further, he changed his story, said she'd panicked, so he let her out near a park. Then silence. The detectives exchanged glances. They'd heard this tone before, the voice of someone who believed that denial could outlast truth. They showed him the photographs, the car seat, the fibers, the partial license plate. His pulse didn't change. "People make mistakes," he said quietly, "but you're wasting your time." While the interrogation continued, forensic reports came back from the state lab. The blood sample in the Datsun was confirmed to be Lori's. The hair matched. Even the fibers taken from the car's upholstery were consistent with the threads found under her fingernails. When confronted with the results, Thierret looked down at the table for a long time. Then he smiled faintly, as though something about the situation amused him. "You can't prove what happened," he said. "You weren't there." That line, simple, cold, would stay with the lead detective for years. Meanwhile, Lori was improving slowly. The burns on her legs were healing. Her voice had begun to return. When investigators brought in a small set of photographs, she hesitated before pointing to one. "That's him," she said softly. The photo showed Thierret clean-shaven, eyes unreadable. The room went still. Even the nurses stopped moving for a moment. In the press conference that followed, the sheriff announced the arrest of a suspect, but avoided details. "We have strong physical evidence," he said. "We believe we've identified the man responsible." Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions, but he didn't elaborate. The investigation was still ongoing. The trial would come later. Inside the interrogation room, however, the tone had shifted. The moment Lori's identification came in, the silence between questions grew heavier. When the detectives played a recording of her quiet voice saying, "That's him," he finally stopped talking. He leaned back in his chair and stared at the wall. He never confessed. Instead, he asked a single question. "Is she alive?" When told that she was, his eyes flickered, not with relief, but something closer to irritation. Then he turned his head and refused to speak again. The case moved quickly after that. A grand jury indicted him for kidnapping, sexual assault, and attempted murder. The evidence was overwhelming. But the trial dragged on for months as defense attorneys argued he had been misidentified, that the blood evidence was contaminated, that he'd simply found the girl wandering and tried to help. The jury didn't believe him. During testimony, Lori's parents sat together in the front row holding hands. They never spoke, but the weight of their presence filled the courtroom. When photographs of the pit were shown, the black void where their daughter had been left to die, several jurors turned away. The defense tried to shift blame onto circumstance, even suggesting that mental illness might have impaired his judgment. But the prosecution reminded them of one fact that could not be softened. He had thrown a living child into a place meant for waste, then walked away. When Lori was asked if she could recognize the man in the room, she pointed to him without hesitation. The courtroom fell silent. Her father later said it was the quietest moment of his life. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison after accepting a plea deal that spared him the possibility of a longer term. To the public, it felt impossibly light. To the family, it felt meaningless. Time, after all, could not measure what he had taken. As the years went on, Sheridan tried to return to normal. But normal never truly came back. The forest where Lori had been found was closed to the public. The old outhouse was torn down. Parents watched their children differently now. Never out of sight, never out of reach. The trial was supposed to bring closure. For months, reporters had framed it as the moment when Sheridan and the country would finally see justice done. The courtroom was full every day. Journalists scribbling notes, neighbors whispering prayers, strangers who had followed the story since the first missing person alert. But what unfolded inside those walls was not what anyone expected. The man accused of abducting and assaulting 3-year-old Lori Poland sat calmly at the defense table, dressed in a gray suit and the same blank expression he had worn since his arrest. His lawyers argued that the evidence, though damning, was circumstantial, that there was no direct proof he had been the one to commit the assault or to throw her into the pit. They pointed to a technicality: contamination of the blood sample, partial fingerprints too degraded to match with certainty. They called his wife as a witness. She swore under oath that her husband had been home the afternoon Lori disappeared. That alibi, later proven false, was enough to fracture what should have been an open and shut case. The prosecutors fought back hard. They showed the jury photographs of the car, the fibers, the candy wrapper. They played a recording of Lori's faint identification, her small voice saying, "That's him." The courtroom went silent every time her name was spoken, but the defense knew the law's limits better than anyone. They reminded the jury that the girl's memory, though brave, came from a 3-year-old child. "Can we be certain?" one attorney asked, pacing before the jurors. "Can we sentence a man for life based on a memory that fragile?" In the end, it came down to strategy: to spare Lori from having to testify again, to keep her from reliving what no child should. The district attorney accepted a plea deal. The charge was reduced, the sentence unthinkably light: 10 years in prison. Reporters rushed to the steps of the courthouse as the verdict was read. The sheriff refused to comment. The prosecutor's face looked carved from stone. Inside the courtroom, Lori's mother held her daughter close and whispered that it was over, even though they both knew it wasn't. The man who had stolen her childhood was led away in handcuffs. He never looked back. To him, perhaps the story was finished. But to everyone else, it was only beginning. When the sentence was announced, headlines across Colorado erupted with outrage. Justice denied for Lori Poland. Editorials accused the courts of protecting the guilty at the expense of the innocent. Outside the courthouse, protesters held signs that read 6 years for a child's life, because that was what the math would become. With good behavior and parole credits, he served just 6 years. 6 years for 4 days in a pit. 6 years for a lifetime of nightmares. When he walked out of prison in 1990, the cameras were waiting again. His head was lowered, his expression unchanged. He didn't speak, didn't apologize. Within months, he left Colorado altogether, eventually resurfacing in California as a registered sex offender. For the Poland family, the release reopened every wound. Lori was 9 years old then, old enough to understand what out of prison meant. Her mother refused to let her watch the news, but the headlines found her anyway. At school, whispered among parents, printed on front pages at the grocery store. Her father said nothing for days. Then one evening he walked out to the backyard and smashed the wooden fence with a hammer until his hands bled. Lori remembered the sound more than the words. The rhythm of anger, the echo of something that wouldn't fade. The public called it a failure of justice. For Lori, it became something else entirely. A lesson in what justice really meant to her. Prison walls didn't hold the man who had hurt her. They held an idea, the idea that punishment could ever make her whole. That 6 years could erase 4 days in a hole. She would later tell interviewers that she never believed in closure. "There's no closing what doesn't end," she said quietly. "You just learn to live around it." But she did live. She grew older, studied psychology, and began to turn the same questions that haunted her inward. How does a child survive something that should have ended them? What does healing look like when the world has already decided your story is finished? Those questions became her compass. As an adult, she worked with survivors of abuse and neglect, helping them find language for pain that the courts could never name. She told them that healing wasn't a verdict. It was a choice you made over and over again. "I don't think of him anymore," she once said in an interview. "He had 6 years of my silence. He doesn't get the rest of my life." Still, every August, the memories returned. The sound of gravel, the smell of rain, the voice that told her to get into the car. Some nights she woke gasping, her body remembering what her mind had tried to forget. But then morning came, and she stood up. That she decided was her victory. For the people of Sheridan, the case remained a scar. A reminder that evil could wear an ordinary face, drive an ordinary car, and still walk free. Parents held their children closer. The woods where she'd been found were closed for years, and yet out of that darkness, something larger emerged. Conversations about child safety, survivor advocacy, and the limits of the law itself. Because if the system had failed her, Lori refused to. Years later, when she was asked what justice meant to her, she smiled. Not bitterly, but with the calm of someone who had learned to live inside her own story. Justice, she said, isn't about what happens to him. It's about what I do with what he left behind. She paused, looking out the window of her office, the light catching the faint scar on her leg. It's about living. That's the only verdict that matters. And in that sense, maybe she had won. Not because the law had punished her abductor, but because she had refused to let him define her ending. For most of her life, Lori Poland lived with ghosts. Not the kind that haunted houses, but the kind that waited in the corners of her own mind. The smell of rot, the sound of dripping water, the feeling of being small and unseen in the dark. Sometimes they came without warning. In an elevator, in a closed bathroom, or when the lights flickered unexpectedly. The body, she learned, remembers what the mind tries to bury. As a child, she was terrified of the dark. She slept with a lamp on, her stuffed bear beside her, the door always open. At school, she flinched when someone walked too close behind her. Teachers called it nervousness. Her parents called it being careful, but Lori knew it was more than that. It was memory wearing the shape of instinct. Through adolescence, the nightmares persisted. They were never cinematic. No monsters or shadows, only the pit, the blackness, the smell, the endless waiting. She would wake drenched in sweat, gasping, her hands clenching the sheets as if they were ropes. Therapy came early, but for years she treated it like homework. Something she was supposed to do, not something she believed in. The sessions helped her talk about the facts, but not the feelings. She could say I was kidnapped, but she couldn't yet say I was afraid. By her late teens, Lori understood the strange paradox of survival, that everyone wanted her to be grateful for being alive, while no one really wanted to hear what being alive felt like. Reporters asked about miracles, about courage. They never asked about shame or guilt or the strange burden of being the girl who lived. She tried to outrun it for a while, through school, through relationships, through years of pretending that the past was something that happened to someone else. But trauma, she discovered, doesn't fade. It waits, patient and heavy, until you decide to face it. That reckoning came in her 20s during a volunteer program for children in crisis. One day, a little girl she was counseling told her, "I feel like no one sees me." The words landed like a strike of lightning, because Lori had been that child, unseen, unheard, left in the dark. That was the day she decided to stop running. She returned to therapy, this time as both patient and student. She studied psychology, learned about the language of trauma, and slowly built a bridge between the child she had been and the woman she wanted to become. Healing, she realized, was not a straight line. It was a loop, a constant negotiation between memory and meaning. In her 30s, Lori became a licensed therapist specializing in childhood trauma and resilience. Her office was quiet and sunlit, with soft chairs and open windows. No dark corners, no locked doors. Safety, she often told her clients, isn't just a place. It's a feeling we have to rebuild. Her work caught the attention of medical advocates, and soon she joined forces with researchers and doctors to co-found the National Foundation to End Child Abuse and Neglect. The organization sought to change how the world viewed abuse, not just as a crime, but as a public health issue, one that left scars both physical and invisible. As the executive director, Lori spoke at universities, hospitals, and conferences, using her story not for sympathy, but for proof that survival was possible. That brokenness was not the end. In interviews, her tone was calm, matter of fact. Even when discussing the most horrific details, "I don't remember everything," she once said. "But my body does, and that's enough to teach me compassion." In 2022, she published her memoir titled, "I Live Here Now," named after the words she had spoken as a child from the bottom of the pit. In its pages, she wrote not about the crime, but about the reclamation, how she had learned to inhabit her own life again. I used to think those words meant surrender, she wrote. Now I think they meant survival, because I didn't say I die here now. I said I live here now, and somehow I did. The book became a quiet success, passed among survivors and therapists, used in classrooms and support groups. Readers described it as both devastating and luminous, a story that didn't erase pain, but refused to let pain erase hope. Over the years, Lori became the voice she once needed to hear, the steady one that told others they mattered. That healing was not about erasing the past, but learning how to live beside it. When asked what message she hoped her work would leave behind, she smiled the way people do when they've already survived the hardest part. You matter, she said. When you believe you matter, you can do impossible things. Those words became NCAN's unofficial motto. They appeared on banners, t-shirts, and the organization's website. But to Lori, they were more than a slogan. They were a quiet rebellion against the silence that had once defined her. She still carried the scars, the physical ones on her legs, the invisible ones that showed up in moments of panic or exhaustion. Healing didn't erase them. It turned them into markers of distance, proof of how far she'd come. Every August, when the anniversary came, she visited the mountains west of Denver. Not the exact site, but close enough to feel the same air. She would stand beneath the trees, close her eyes, and let the silence wash over her. It was no longer frightening. It was hers. She once told a reporter, "The man who hurt me thought he buried me. He didn't know I was a seed," and maybe that's what her story became. Not a tale of survival alone, but of transformation. A child left in the dark grew into a woman who devoted her life to pulling others out of it. Her voice, once small and trembling, now carried across auditoriums and airwaves. The same voice that once whispered from the pit, now reminding others to keep living, to keep reaching for light. If this story moved you, like, share, and subscribe. Every click helps us keep telling the stories that remind the world what survival really means. Because every view, every comment keeps their voices and their courage alive.